So I would just like to start by introducing the team. So we have a few panelists here who we may or may not call on, depending on how the questions come up. But as Councillor Monk has already introduced, the team is led by ourselves at We Made That. We're architects and urban designers, clearly commissioned by Folkestone and Hythe District Council. And from their side, we have Ewan Green and Lorraine Smith with us tonight, who will answer questions if we need them to. PRD are socioeconomic specialists and consultants, and we have Chris Paddock and Rosa Sully from PRD with us tonight to answer any questions on that front. Fletcher Priest Architects have been working with us to think about the particular development opportunities or architectural opportunities within the town centre. And Stina is here from Fletcher Priest tonight. And we're also working with Steer, who are transport consultants, and the Nighttime Industries Association to think about licensing in the town centre. So that's the full kind of breadth of expertise that we have available. This is the structure of what we'd like to work our way through, and we're already a little bit early, so that's we're going well. It means we'll have a lot of time to have your questions. We would like to run through just the overall programme of what it is that we're trying to achieve in how much time, and a bit of a sense of the work that we've done so far, particularly in terms of the engagement work that we've done so far. Then we'd like to introduce to you our current thinking, which is based on that engagement that's taken place so far, and what we're calling the missions for the town centre. And then we have an opportunity for questions and feedback on those. So we're really interested to hear your thoughts on that. And then you'll see as we work through the presentation that we've identified then particular actions or interventions or projects in relation to different bits of the town centre. So we'd like to present those to you and then again have an opportunity for questions and feedback on those. So that's what we'd like to get through, introductory stuff and then emerging proposals. This, I'm just going to hide everybody. This is an overview of what we've been doing so far. So we started work in around January. We're aiming to finish in around June. The first task that we undertook was what we call an urban appraisal. So really thinking in a lot of detail about particularly the town centre, but also a broader area, which I'll come to in a minute. The issues and opportunities around that. We've also been undertaking an amount of engagement, which I can cover on the next slide, but has been structured around some directed conversations to particular stakeholders, a few group workshops, particularly of representatives of wider, for example, residents groups. Some work with schools, and then today's public event. We also anticipate that there'll be a future public event and licensing workshops, which I think actually the kind of timing of these is to be confirmed exactly. Alongside that engagement process, we've been working on developing an overall strategy for the study area and our proposals, and we still have some way to go to develop those in more detail. So now's a good time to have some input from you all. And then I mentioned this licensing policy review and draft, and that's another kind of parallel strand of work that we're working through. I should say, just for clarity, that the slides will be available online. So if I'm going too quickly, they'll all be there for you to have a look at. So I mentioned the engagement process so far. We've had 38 of these directed kind of one-to-one conversations with particular stakeholders and 4 workshops, which have been themed around different aspects of what we think is interesting for Folkestone, with 46 attendees, all representing wider groups or often representing wider groups. And we're also making sure that we're engaging with the relevant parts of the council to make sure that all the necessary stakeholders are understanding and buying into and feeding into the development of the work so far. Some of that has just been virtual calls and some of it has been more sort of online workshop type formats. So in terms of the study area that we're looking at, the extent of the study really is the dotted line, so this kind of wider area, but the focus of that is the town centre core, and that's as it's defined in the planning policy, so in the local plan. But what we recognise is that for that town centre to function well and to perform as it needs to, we need to also be aware of all of the other things that are happening nearby. I mean, for example, it would be crazy to think about the town centre without also thinking about the coastline. So we have this kind of broader boundary, which is shown in the dotted line there. I mentioned that we'd undertaken this baseline appraisal. That has included a whole spectrum, and it's something like 80, 90 pages long, so we definitely won't go through it this evening. But I wanted to just give you a flavour of the kinds of things that we've been looking at. So particularly PRD, have been looking at the socioeconomic aspects of Folkestone and its communities. So the map here indicating levels of deprivation. We've been looking at quite practical things like land ownership, where different uses are happening in the town centre, what activities are happening at what times of day, things like severance, which is where a road, for example, or a cliff is creating an issue of access between different areas, and then some more kind of analytical work. In this case, that was a map looking at how well connected different roads are to each other. But we just want to reassure you that the findings and the kind of conclusions that we come to have been based on this kind of review of the available evidence. And then I just have 2 slides to summarize some of those, and these are quite dense, but behind each of these sits analysis and understanding, and I hope that they'll reflect your understanding of Folkestone as well. So the first is that the town centre needs an integrated approach. We've had a lot of feedback, particularly from the engagement, that some parts of Folkestone are working for some communities and not others, and also that there's kind of physical separation that needs to be overcome. So we need to be thinking holistically about how, for example, the Harbour arm could be contributing to success or improved outcomes in the town centre. That there are lots of opportunities for development in the town centre, and that's something that particularly Fletcher Priest have been looking at. That particularly central and northeastern Folkestone have some pockets of severe deprivation, and that is a situation of long standing that the place plan should seek to address. We know that skills levels in Folkestone are comparatively low by what the data tells us compared with other geographies. That Folkestone needs to attract and retain young people to live and work in the town. We think this is a kind of a historic story that does seem to be at the point of changing. So more and more young people are telling us that they would be interested to stay in Folkestone, but still that's a kind of dynamic that we're aware of. That some of the housing in the town centre is of poor quality and or can be unaffordable, so both ends of the spectrum there. That there's a need to increased feelings of shared identity and community cohesion in Folkestone. So there have been studies that have shown what we call low levels of social capital, but actually what we also see is that there's been an awful lot, since that study was undertaken, an awful lot of community activity. And I think the levels of interest in the webinar tonight show us that actually maybe there's been quite a lot of progress on this front, but still some of the feedback that we've had is that there could be more done on that. That the town centre isn't a very attractive or supportive environment for business growth. We see that from comparatively high rates of business failure from businesses that start and then have to close. So there's something to kind of highlight in that. We also know that Folkestone is reliant on sectors, or particularly reliant on sectors that have been most hard by the pandemic. So this is sectors like retail, like hospitality, that are suffering. I mean, we know overall that clearly Folkestone has suffered at the extreme end of COVID impact across the country in terms of health outcomes as well, but also in terms of the economy. So that's something to kind of highlight and be wary of. And that the nature of employment in Folkestone should be challenged. So some of this perhaps more seasonal, perhaps more informal, less secure working patterns for some of Folkestone's residents is something that we should challenge, and perhaps we should be looking to have a broader segment of the economy that could be expanded and supported beyond, for example, the success of Creative Folkestone and the creative sector. We also know that Folkestone is already a really attractive place to visit, so we shouldn't forget that. This is some kind of fairly negative bits of feedback here, but this is really important to recognise. And it has these excellent transport links, but perhaps the sense of arrival when you use those public transport links doesn't quite live up to the opportunities of the town. This comment about lack of quality hotels, there have been some studies that have shown that. We've had it challenged as well by hoteliers in the town. So mixed views on that, but I think particularly with things like F51 opening up, perhaps we're seeing that there could be even greater levels of hospitality and tourism really to the town centre and to the town. That the cultural quarter and a kind of food scene is putting Folkestone on the map, but again, perhaps there's more that could be done to make that feel like an inclusive offer. That access kind of to the coast and between the coast and the town centre should be stronger and better. That at the moment it's possible to kind of visit the coastline and sort of miss the town centre out altogether, and that's something that we should be trying to overcome. And that there are lots of heritage assets, tons of them actually, that could be celebrated more and kind of more part of that offer of a fantastic place to visit and to live. The next few in green are mostly related to transport and connectivity. So there is this over-engineered and now largely obsolete road network because of the closure of the port. So that's an opportunity, we think, for really significant change. We also see that currently the pedestrian and cycle environments are pretty poor, and that there's more that could be done to encourage people to use sustainable travel. We know that quite a lot of the short journeys in the town, for example, are done by car, and perhaps they don't all need to be. That public transport systems are good and well used, so there are high levels of usage in the bus network, for example, and that the topography of the town makes physical barriers, but is also quite characterful. So we see it both as an opportunity and a challenge. And then this final row is related more to the town centre specifically. So the challenges in the retail offer in Folkestone town centre reflect kind of wider national trends around challenges in retail. We also know that the evening economy is limited. So both of these things are not something necessarily specific to Folkestone, but both need to be kind of considered and addressed, particularly in terms of how much space there is for retail in the town centre. The data tells us also that footfall has fallen consistently over the last few years. So that's something that is of concern, and that hopefully the place plan can identify actions to address that. And a lot of the feedback that we've had is that visual perception of the town centre is quite poor, particularly in terms of just the quality of public spaces, the amount of greenery, signage, these kind of things. And yet these natural assets that are such a great benefit in a way to Folkestone are in really close proximity. So there's so many opportunities that we just need to find the chances to stitch them together. So this is the kind of thing, or these are the kind of things that we've been thinking about as we're kind of working through the early stages of the place plan. What we've done is synthesize them into this structure, which this diagram hopefully makes sense of. We think that overall, the grand challenge for the place plan is to overcome decline and challenge in Folkestone's town centre by embracing opportunity, by celebrating what's great, and by bringing the town's communities together. And we would love your feedback on that, whether that's the right thing, whether that summarises really what we should be trying to achieve. We've broken that down into 6, what we're calling missions. So 6 missions that try to summarise particular issues that we should be targeting or trying to address or overcome, or particular opportunities. I'm going to talk through these in more detail, but just as the headlines. The first is to celebrate what's great. The second is a town centre for the future. The third, a place for all voices. The fourth, moving sustainably. The fifth is access to opportunity. And the 6th is deliver quality. And as I said, I'll talk through those in more detail, so don't feel that you're going to be asked to give feedback just on those titles. But what we've done then is identify, well, not just ourselves actually, a lot through the engagement, these are the suggestions that have come forward to us so far, identify particular actions or interventions, bits of investment that will help to deliver on these 6 missions. And we're describing those through particular geographies within the place plan area. So as I've said, I've kind of described this structure. And what I'd like to do is just go through each of the 6 missions and then have a break. You can stop hearing from me and we'll get to some of the questions that I can see are coming through in the Q&A. So thanks for those. So the first, as I mentioned, to celebrate what's great. So this mission for us is about making the most of Folkestone's best assets. So its coastline, its communities, its heritage and its creativity, to attract visitors, but also to enhance the lives of residents. The diagram here just highlights some of those things that we think are great. Some of them are new and kind of still emerging, or comparatively new. So the Creative Quarter, I mean, F51, when that opens, I think will be one of these things. But there's also an awful lot of heritage. So the listed buildings are highlighted here, as is the conservation area. And clearly the coastline is an essential one. Mission 2 is a town centre for the future. So to reinvigorate the town centre core by identifying opportunities for a new range of uses for community services and employment opportunities. So this is about addressing things like vacancy, which we can anticipate could increase over the next few months or so, even over the next year. And there are specific opportunities to address that. So the fact that the council have taken on Folkestone in the old Debenhams building centrally is a great opportunity. And with Fletcher Priest, we've also identified further opportunities that are highlighted in the blue here. So this is really about kind of focusing on what should be the kinds of activities and uses that are happening in the town centre. We have some ideas from that. We know that the people that we've spoken to so far have some ideas for that, and we're certainly keen to hear yours this evening. Mission 3 is a place for all voices. In some ways, this mission is a direct response to some of the feedback that we've had, which is that the people of Folkestone feel that regeneration is done to them and not with them. We think that it's essential that that's kind of overcome as we take forward these proposals. So a place for all voices is working with the people of Folkestone to develop proposals that are meaningful to all now and into the future. And we're really keen to make sure that we're not just doing that through the place plan process, but that any projects that are delivered as a result of the place plan are also able to deliver on this mission. Mission 4 is moving sustainably. So to create an environment that better connects the town centre and its surroundings and supports active movement and enables healthy lifestyles and well-being. This is not about excluding cars, but about recognising that it would be good if non-car-based travel was a realistic option for a lot of people. So that could include electric cycle hire, for example, but also looking at things like the opportunities of overhauling that road network, which I don't think anybody has said is good, particularly along, for example, Shellen Street or Cheriton Road, that there are opportunities to overhaul that, to make use of some of that space which isn't really needed for vehicles to move in the way that they need to. And so this diagram is just highlighting some of those things which could be about overhauling road networks, but also could be about improving existing pedestrian links, for example. Mission 5 is access to opportunity. So embedding opportunities for support, skills and training to allow all residents of Folkestone to benefit from change. So here we've identified just in the diagram schools and educational facilities, but also the geography, which is identified through the data as being within the 10% most deprived in the country. You can see that there's a really strong overlap between this area suffering from high levels of deprivation and the town centre core. We think that it's really important that as proposals are delivered through the place plan, or as anything really is delivered in Folkestone, that we're also thinking about how that is creating opportunities for local people in a really tangible way. And we have some examples for that, we think, in the coming slides. And then finally, for this section, mission 6 is to deliver quality. So it's not just enough to make sure that we're building stuff or spending money on Folkestone, but to ensure that the quality of delivery meets Folkestone's full potential, and that we secure the support of all partners who will be needed to deliver on the ambitions of the place plan. So we recognise that the council shouldn't and won't be the only organisation required to make sure that Folkestone can deliver on its potential. That's in a way the purpose of the missions being structured in this way, is so that everybody can understand, or hopefully can understand, what it is that we're aiming to achieve together, and can see which parts of these missions they could contribute to. In a way, I'm thinking particularly of private developers potentially, but there are a whole range of organisations that we think can contribute to this. So at that point, I am going to take a break and have a look at some of the questions that are coming through. Where should we start? How were stakeholders and interviewees selected? I can see that Ewan is typing an answer to that, so I'm going to leave him to answer that, but we can come back to that too. The next question that I have in terms of votes is, I'm new to Folkestone. The environment seems car-centred, and while it's a small town, it can be easy to walk around. The experience of cycling along the coastline is lovely, but should be more consistent from the moment you arrive in Folkestone across the town centre. This will make the area safe to walk and cycle around. What are your plans when it comes to walking and cycling infrastructure in the town? Do you base them on air pollution levels? Does the council measure pollution levels, especially around schools and in residential areas near busy roads? I can't answer about the council's measurement of pollution levels in the wider area, but it is something that's fed into our baseline work. In the next set of slides, we've identified some particular routes where we think walking and cycling could be improved, and it would be great to have your input on whether or how that's reflective of the areas that are kind of most of a concern to you, I think, is the best way to answer that one. So I'm going to say that I've answered that one live. Will the baseline work and stats not be as accurate as it's been undertaken during a pandemic? From Vivka. So obviously some things are affected by the pandemic. There've been a lot of studies pre-pandemic that we've also been looking at, and all of that work has fed in. I don't know if PRD would have something more to say on accuracy of data during the pandemic. I mean, it's true that some things are skewed, but it's not all been a snapshot just over the last year. I don't know, Rosa or Chris, if you would like to say anything more about that.
I'll start, and Rosa might want to join in. I think it's a good question, and it's a question we get asked everywhere. I think the thing is, we don't know what we can make judgments on what the impact of the pandemic's been over the last year, but we don't know what the impact's going to be in the future. So we are at times either relying upon new data. The government's been quite good at releasing data over the last year, so we get monthly data on changes in things like claimant counts. We get monthly data on the number of people on furlough, and data on sort of business closures, things like that. So we can be reasonably accurate, and actually I would say the data is better than it used to be before the start of the pandemic. And then we sort of have to use assumptions for other things. So the Treasury and the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, also put out forecasts, and we can apply those to different areas in different ways as well. So I think it's apart from the fact it's going to be a different type of recession that we'll probably go into in the coming years, it's the data's not too bad, and I think we can make some reasonable judgments on the basis of what's available.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. There's a question from Andrew Richardson about how we've engaged with and consulted on the town's heritage and history. There's actually a summary of who's been invited to all of the workshops so far and the feedback from those sessions on the council's website, which, Emily, I'm going to ask you to put that link into the Q&A box, I think is the way to do that, so that people can see it. So everything that's summarised in all of those conversations are publicly available, so you're able to see those. And we've answered Vivka's question. Leslie, I see that you've asked again about how the stakeholders and interviewees were selected, and there's an answer from you, and that's just coming to you on that. Mark, as identified in your studies, heritage is incredibly important. Why has the Bale and the parish church, oh, sorry, that's just jumped around. I've lost that question. Here. So yeah, Mark Hurricane, your question has just been answered by Will Beeston. So the study area does include those buildings that you've identified. The core boundary is the town centre boundary as per planning policy. So that's what that line indicates. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at the others. I'm going to answer Darienne Price's question, which is, bearing in mind that we have an elderly demographic, how are we going to make sure that we still make sure that people can access the town centre? I think essentially if we stop cars, but we're not proposing to stop cars. So there is no, that's not the proposal. We're just saying that it should be a viable alternative to be able to walk and cycle comfortably and safely. And then I'm trying to pick off the questions at the top of the list that are getting the most votes. So that's great. Thanks everyone for engaging so much and so well with this. So here's Darienne's. Yeah, so I think hopefully I've answered that one. We're not planning to stop car access, but we are hoping to make sure that it's possible to travel in other ways. Emily, I'm wondering if you can highlight to me any particular others that we should be answering now. So MJ Ainsworth asked that the present town centre has a lot of residential property, mainly on the Lees. What are we doing for town residents, or is it all for visitors and shopping opportunities? Residential properties bring cars and the Lees is starved of parking. So what is the plan? So I think there are two questions within this one. One is what are we doing for residents? And I think the intention is that everything that we do is beneficial to residents, and that being able to access the coast and having a vibrant town centre that those things are still opportunities that that residents would value. If there are other specific things that, as a resident or on behalf of residents, that you'd like to bring to our attention, we would really, really like to hear that. And it's possible that the survey that Emily's just put the link in, I can see that has gone to panelists and attendees in the chat box, that's a good way to feed back to us on that. And then the second question was about parking. So one of our proposals is that there should be a wider review of parking. So we are able to make observations, we're able to feed back on challenges and opportunities that people raise to us in terms of parking. But it is a kind of dedicated piece of work, we think, that needs more detailed consideration. There are opportunities coming up where parking is being freed up in some places. So for example, Saga moving out of the town centre. But clearly parking is an issue that needs to be considered really carefully. And so that's why we're making that recommendation through the place plan. When is the Lees lift going to operate and be restored? So this one I know has been an ongoing conversation and a kind of live subject. I don't know, Lorraine, perhaps you would like to have the most up-to-date answer on that one?
Thanks, Holly. I think I did respond somewhere on, there was another question with regards to the Lees lift. So I have regular contact with the trustees of the Lees lift CIC. And our last discussion, they are in the process of putting and submitting a bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which will then put them on course for the restoration of the lift. I think we all recognise the importance that has in the overall scheme of things. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm not sure, I could see that Ewan was typing an answer to Leslie's question about how the stakeholders and interviewees were selected, but that doesn't seem to be coming through, and I don't want to leave you just hanging there, Leslie. So what I can say is that we worked with the council to identify a list of stakeholders, particular groups, or like I mentioned, kind of residents groups or landowners, these kind of things. And you can see from the list of people that it's nearly 50, that was quite a long list. We also, as we interviewed those people or spoke to those people, asked them to recommend others who we might also need to get in touch with. So between those 38 individual phone calls and the 47, I think, who attended the workshops, that was kind of how that network was put together. I think in a way we can see from the fact that there were 320 people that have signed up for this session, the benefits of taking that approach rather than doing this big open call in the first instance is kind of trying to meet those groups. But I want to just kind of emphasize that there is no greater weight put on that feedback as opposed to feedback that we hear from people more broadly. So it's not that they get put in a special box. The feedback that came through those sessions is that it was really just a process of us trying to get to know issues and to make sure that at this first session where we've got now nearly 170 people on the call, that we're able to bring something useful to you rather than just, well, we've only just started and we don't know, we don't know what we think. So that was that process, but just as I say, to kind of reiterate that we're still really, really keen to hear from as many people as possible, and that there isn't a kind of additional weight put to those questions as against others. What I would like to also say at this point is, because I think there's so many questions coming through and that's really fantastic, I'm really, really pleased. But what I should also say is that we'll be capturing all of these questions. If we aren't able to get to them this evening and we aren't able to answer them all, we'll make sure that we come back separately and we'll put those onto the website. So just in case, because I can see that with 57 open questions, it's possible that we might not get through them all or be able to show everything. So hopefully, Leslie, that answers the question. The next one with a good number of votes is, why is the village in Bouverie Road West not included in the discussion? Like parts of the Lees, including Leescliff Hall, outside of that dotted line. Well, we really welcome feedback on if we're not including the right areas. I think there is a clear direction from the council that we should be focusing on the town centre and how things that we're proposing can support the town centre. It doesn't mean that these other areas are not worthy of consideration for something else, but there is a need to kind of keep some level of focus. But if you feel really strongly that these things could be included and can tell us about that, then we're really, really happy to hear that feedback. That's part of the point. Things are not finalised at this point. Daniel Keeling says, how much money has the council allocated to implement the ideas developed? So at the moment, there isn't a specific delivery budget for that, but there are opportunities to secure funding to support some of these ideas. The other idea and the other kind of point that's worth making is that, as I mentioned, this kind of the structure of these missions is hopefully that external parties can see where they can contribute to them. So for example, developers coming forward, maybe for the Saga building, for example, could see what the ambitions of the place plan are, can understand that the council and hopefully the people of Folkestone have bought into that, and that it doesn't rely on council funding to deliver or develop all of the opportunities that we're seeing here. But we know that there are various bits of central government funding that perhaps could be relevant for this. So things like the Levelling Up Fund are around at the moment. There's one round open now. There will be future rounds open. So there are opportunities to use the place plan to get that funding to deliver things. And in a way, it's better to have your shopping list and know what you're asking for when it comes to those kinds of funding or those types of funding. So at the moment, the council doesn't have a huge budget to deliver on all of the things that we hope to show you later. But the intention is that the place plan will help to put everybody in a better position to get that funding. So Leslie has come back. Our concern is that although the heritage sector is mentioned, there hasn't been discussion about some of the significant work that has taken place in the last 15 years or so, which shows Folkestone has an outstanding early history. We would very much hope that this can now be discussed. We are really happy to hear, and in fact, Emily, I think, has been sent copies of books and things from various heritage groups and stakeholders. We're really, really keen to hear about things like this, which you feel are important, particularly where they relate to specific interventions that we should be making or places that we should be acknowledging. For us, it's really helpful not just to say, well, we could write a book about these interesting things in Folkestone, but where we can see that there are particular sites or locations. That is a really, really useful thing for people to highlight to us. And we're absolutely happy to hear from you all on that and what those opportunities might be. I am quite rightly being prompted by my team to say that that's probably the last question before we move on to the next section. Hopefully, some of the things that I'm going to show next will help to answer some of these questions. Again, I'm going to try and move through them fairly swiftly, but let me just go back to sharing my screen and we'll just get on to the next section. There is another opportunity for questions later, so please don't feel that we're trying to cut you off. So I mentioned that the actions that are coming forward, these kind of opportunities for intervention or for investment, we've tried to group under specific geographies. These are those geographies. So we have 6 of them, and under each we have a list of projects that we think help to deliver against those missions. It's worth also pointing out that Ship Street, whilst it's kind of slightly further afield, we think has something to contribute, particularly in terms of routes from the station and towards, for example, F51. That's something that's come up through the engagement so far as well. So whilst it's slightly outside, we do kind of want to highlight that as an opportunity to still support some of these ambitions and to support Folkestone. So these are quite dense. As I've said, all of this will be available online. So if you feel that you want to come back and kind of pick through them and tell us where we've missed opportunities, then we would love that. So just starting by the station, so the station arrival area. Under the first mission, so celebrate what's great, we think that there's really this opportunity to improve the public realm and kind of arrival experience of arriving at the station, potentially with a small square, and then related to mission 3, so a place for all voices, that there should be opportunities for community involvement with some of those initiatives. So potentially a community garden is also something that's come up there. But in this area, mission 4 of moving sustainably is the one where there seems to be a lot of opportunity. So that could be including things like cycle hire at the station, or what we call a mobility hub, so the ability to kind of switch between different modes of transport. For us, that should include a direct bus link that goes from the station to the coastline, which doesn't currently exist. I mentioned already this kind of legacy of the highway system, Cheriton Road and Cheriton Gardens being particularly challenging, particularly for people that are coming from the station into the town centre on foot, for example, which should be a positive experience. So we think there are opportunities to look at redesigning junctions and looking at the roads here. We think that there are also opportunities to improve wayfinding, so just signage and walking and cycling experience, and that includes down Castle Hill Avenue, and that there can be new and improved routes. So I mentioned this route down Broadmead Road, potentially through the Ship Street site and onwards to places like F51. And working with other organisations, so Cycling UK being one example, to make sure that we're supporting and encouraging sustainable and active travel, not stopping cars, but making sure that alternatives are viable and safe. So to look at just some schemes from elsewhere of things that could be relevant, cycle paths and walking, incorporating things like sustainable urban drainage, so that means planting, higher quality public realm, signage. I mean, maybe this is a bit fruity for some, but there are some interesting examples of quite vibrant public spaces that perhaps relate more to that kind of skate scene that might be coming forward. Moving along, so Sandgate Road West. We think there's an opportunity for improved public realm along Sandgate Road West itself. In terms of a town centre for the future, that there are opportunities for perhaps testing new uses within some of the units that could be vacant along Sandgate Road West, and that would be a chance to trial things out and test them, as well as opportunities for, I mean, we can reasonably see or foresee that there could be housing developments available and possible in some of these sites, and Sainsbury's is one where we think that could be possible. So these are the kinds of things that Fletcher Priest will be looking at. In terms of mission 3, a place for all voices, I think there's an opportunity to involve local people in what testing those new uses might be, and thinking about kind of occupying some of those vacant retail units. Mission 4, moving sustainably, so having a stronger and seamless connection that goes kind of around the Lees Cliff Hall, essentially, that's more accessible and safer and of a higher quality. Public transport routes around the town centre have been raised, and we can talk about that more on the next slide. And improved cycle parking provision is something that specifically has come up as well. And then in terms of access to opportunity, we're thinking that it would be interesting to think about how we can encourage local businesses to set up training programs. So for example, particularly in the kind of seasonal work sector, that's come up from the schools, that there's an opportunity for kind of young enterprise, I guess, that could be done in partnership with local businesses. And that there can be enterprise facilitation and participation programs, particularly with some of those communities that are suffering from deprivation. And that's something that the council could perhaps facilitate. So then in terms of examples, here we have some which are kind of physical examples of public realm upgrades that are supporting walking and cycling, fairly modest scale housing developments, for example, but also some which are more on that sort of social and economic side of things. So Community Plus Kirklees is a programme that the council runs there, supporting individuals and community groups. So it works with people in a very tailored kind of direct one-to-one way to help them have happier lives is what it says here. Or for example, in Frome, the Library of Things is the use of an empty shop, but for a kind of collective social enterprise. The town centre core, this one I'm afraid is very dense because there is so much to say. But I'll try and go through it quickly. And like I said, it's available online if you want to come back and think about it more. So we think that there are public realm opportunities in several places here. One along Shelland Street. So if we're kind of reclaiming some of that space from the unnecessary width that's there from the legacy highways infrastructure, that could be new public realm. Equally, Sandgate Road itself, so in front of Debenhams, Folker leading towards the town hall. This idea of Guildhall Square, so a square in front of the town hall, has come up quite a lot. A bigger move here that we're suggesting would be useful to look into in more detail is essentially relocating the bus station and reinstating Bouverie Square as an open space for the town centre. We think that there are development opportunities that would benefit from that, so the Saga building being one, but that would be a big move that creates a focus for the town centre that supports all of the kind of things that we're talking about in terms of walking and cycling, and overcomes just the kind of environmental challenge really of the bus station as it is at the moment. So that's something that we plan to look into in more detail. In terms of a town centre for the future, we can anticipate, and Fulker is one example, that vacancies will be available and kind of coming up in the town centre, and that it would be interesting to kind of use those as a lab really to test new uses. So that could include things like places to work, things like community provision. Clearly the vaccine centre is already taking place there, but there are a wider range of community facilities that are actually underprovided for the quite densely populated town centre at the moment that could be used to tackle some of that vacancy. An example here is that perhaps the Reborn Furniture Project building could be used for workspace for startups and scale-ups. And we're really keen to move beyond just the creative sector, but to build on the success of the Creative Quarter to say that other businesses could be attracted to and could choose to locate and grow in Folkestone. Another example, which is on the table but absolutely not decided, is the opportunity to relocate the council offices into the town centre. In some scale, it could be a smaller scale kind of public facing offer, or even up to kind of all of the offices is what we've kind of put on the table. But they've been kind of public in the announcement of the intention to sell the current office site. So that's something that could be considered. And then again, on the kind of economic side of things, the opportunity to create a single business network, again, not kind of sector focused as the Creative Quarter is, but for all businesses in the town centre. In terms of moving sustainably, I've mentioned already the opportunity in relation to the bus station, but we think that that can include improvements to this junction of Cheriton Road and Shellham Street. The parking review I've also talked about, and a mobility hub. So with cycle hire and storage, albeit electric cycles probably for those of us who might struggle to get up the hills, that there are various opportunities or spaces where that could happen. We're also really interested in thinking about how cycling, walking and even skateboarding could be specifically accommodated within some of the kind of public spaces of the town centre. Access to opportunity, we think that there's a chance to work with educational institutions and businesses, and I've kind of mentioned that already, as well as a launchpad programme for businesses within the town centre, which could also be taking advantage of some of that empty space. And here is something which, if people are interested in hearing more, would be something that PRD could answer on, exploring opportunities for more diverse community ownership of assets. That could be really exciting. And this is where we've got a few things on mission 6, so delivering quality, reviews of town centre housing policy and licensing to address poor quality housing where that's an issue. We've suggested here that the town centre would be really relevant for an application to the Levelling Up Fund. We recognise that there's a kind of council decision to be taken on that, but we think it's very relevant to some of that funding that's available centrally. We've suggested that some aspects of the place plan could be developed to become adopted planning policy, not in its current form, but that would hold developers to account in terms of what needs to be achieved on some of these development sites. And we've also suggested a town centre design review panel, and we've said that that could include community representatives to make sure that those views are heard locally. Then in terms of examples, again, these might be ones that are interesting to kind of come back to, but I guess one that is worth highlighting and could be interesting is International House in Brixton, where there are some elements of this building, which is multi-storey, in this case it's 12 stories, some elements of this building which are let at a full market rent, so kind of higher prices, but that cross-funds spaces that are available at a more affordable level for local businesses. So there is an opportunity to support kind of wider business growth as well as community development. The other example here that I think is interesting is Everyone Every Day in Barking. So this is a dedicated strategy for community participation and capacity building in local projects that we think could be developed alongside a lot of these delivery projects to make sure that people really genuinely feel included. The Creative Quarter here, slightly less dense, but still a lot to say, I'm afraid. So we think that there are opportunities for public space and public realm upgrades, particularly around F51, the sort of wider area there could be included, and that can connect through to Payers Park. And potentially things like building on the public art programmes that have already been taking place in the creative quarter, that it's possible for that to kind of expand outwards. In terms of the town centre for the future, again, this is a series of development opportunities really, but we think that Lidl is one that we can reasonably foresee could come forward. So that will be one that will be interesting to look at further. And I've mentioned already the licensing policy review, so that is something that will also be kind of considered as part of what does the future of the town centre look like. And we think that there's potential for Payers Park to be, rather than a kind of back of house area, a hub of uses or a kind of campus of different uses. And we're interested to talk to the various stakeholders who control different assets around in relation to that. Shepway Youth Hub could be supported with larger spaces. It would be interesting to hear views on that. In terms of moving sustainably, I guess the key one here is 4.14. So reconfiguring this junction to allow movement in, to enable all directions of travel from that point. So changing some of the gyratory system into two-way working is something that Steer, particularly our transport consultants, are looking into. And so that's the point to kind of highlight in relation to that. So when I say looking at the road network, I don't mean removing cars, I mean changing single direction or kind of one-way routes into two-way working, and potentially reducing the carriageway space that's no longer required. Steer are also very interested in future technologies in terms of on-demand public transport. So that's something that might be interesting, particularly as we think about evening uses. And this mention of a leisure loop, so other active routes, essentially just supporting different routes to get around the town centre. The leisure loop could also be something that includes, for example, getting to F51 on your skateboard. I don't mean to keep using that as an example, but it's very tangible. Access to Opportunity Mission 5 is thinking about expanding the offer of the Cube Adult Education Centre, and things like continuation of the Folkestone Community Works programme, which actually I understand has been has secured some extra funding to carry on for a bit longer. So then in terms of precedents, I mean, there are some really interesting ones that are already coming forward in Folkestone, and it would be curious to think about where that might happen in future. Things like Renew Newcastle are quite interesting in terms of thinking of new uses for vacant and vacant units and supporting local enterprise. And then I mentioned things about public realm, how that could be something that maybe is more active, potentially in kind of relevant areas related to skating. And the coastal area and heritage quarter. So here, clearly very important. In terms of celebrating what's great, there have been two particular things that have come up a lot through our engagement. One is better celebration of the Remembrance statue and the Road of Remembrance, thinking about that not just from a kind of travel perspective, but saying, should this not just be a new piece of public space? The other aspect here that's come up a lot is St Mary and St Ainsworth Church, and how, whilst it's actually close to the town centre, you can't really get a sense of it being there. So interventions that we could propose that would help celebrate that as part of the town centre, and we're really interested to hear your views on that. We can also see that there could be development opportunities here, and I think the Iceland building is one that we're interested to look into further. And then just in terms of moving sustainably, the opportunity to really move more seamlessly from the town centre to the coast through this area, and perhaps alongside the Lees lift, as Lorraine has already mentioned, securing funding to be reinstated. Do we need to think about other vertical transport systems to complement that, given the development that's happening at the seafront? So then just finally, in terms of examples, I mean, there's more kind of heritage sensitive public spaces that could be possible. The green rooms here is highlighting an opportunity for a social enterprise hotel, which is quite interesting. And perhaps there could be more specific things about kind of facade improvements or signage related to some of those buildings, which actually many of them are quite high quality, but could still be celebrated better within the public spaces. And then I think this is the last one. So the Harbour and Sunny Sands. Again, things that have come up through our engagement, but also that we think are really relevant. So potentially public space upgrades again, an opportunity to think about heritage renewal for the Sunny Sands Pavilion, and making sure that that's kind of celebrated. This has been particularly raised as a sort of, for the people of East Folkestone, a particularly important area and kind of a sense of ownership, I guess, from that community. Connecting the town station and the harbour area through to the town centre, we can just see little bits here, but wherever we can make those connections stronger or more pleasant for people to use, then we think that we should be doing that. I mentioned already the Sunny Sands Pavilion, but in terms of public toilets and shower offers, perhaps could be accommodated there. Tram road improvements, we know that that's clearly something that various groups within the town have been looking at for a while, and that's something that we totally support through the place plan. And we think that this kind of between various leisure offers, relationships perhaps to the Warren and things like potentially cycling there or walking there, that this could be quite a sort of active leisure hub. One of the suggestions again that's come through engagement so far is a tidal pool. It'd be very interesting to hear feedback on that. And then in terms of access to opportunity, again, I think that there's a relationship between this sort of seasonal trade and seasonal business that happens in Folkestone and incorporating or involving young people to learn about enterprise, running businesses, having jobs, and that's something that's come up through our engagement with schools. So in terms of precedents, perhaps there are specific things that we could do to support that sort of sports and leisure offer and boat facilities. The Barking Bathhouse, it was a kind of temporary use related to health and well-being that could be interesting to look at, but perhaps there are also more permanent facilities that could support some of these kinds of uses. So again, I'm afraid just rattling through, but I am really mindful of making sure that we have a good opportunity to ask for questions, and I can see that there's 100 of them waiting for us, so I'm going to stop sharing and come to the first set of questions. What I'm hoping to do is find one that, okay. So there's a question from an anonymous attendee about the council's plans to alleviate the problem of homelessness. And I think perhaps Lorraine or you, and I don't know if you want to respond to that or if that's something you'd like to come back to separately. It feels like it's kind of wider perhaps than just the place plan. So if you guys would want to tell me what you think about answering that one.
Holly, thank you. I think that's one that we'll come back to colleagues in our housing teams and come back with a full answer.
Great, that sounds perfect, thank you. And then Lizzie Stewart asked what plans have been put in place for the old building, which used to be Debenham. So this is Folker. And I think, again, Lorraine or Ewan, perhaps you want to give us the most current status on that.
Yeah, very happy to, thank you. So the council took the opportunity to purchase Folker, recognising it was a very important regeneration asset for the town and could be transformational. So we're looking at a number of uses for the future, including health facilities, medical practices. There might be some housing, some leisure offer, perhaps a cinema, and some additional retail that will add value to the town. Thanks.
Thank you. That's great. I'm going to just work my way through the ones that have voted up to the top of the list, I think. So Alex says, is it realistic to regenerate such a long high street? I don't know, Alex, if you're there, we've got kind of half an hour to play with. If you want to ask that question live, Emily, can I ask you to unmute Alex so that that question can come to us directly? Alex, are you there? Hi.
Yes, I am. Hello, thank you. Yeah, I've always thought that it's a very long high street and the shops and restaurants and cafes and businesses along it seem to be quite spread out, interspersed with vacant premises. So whether it would make sense to, obviously over time, encourage businesses to relocate or new ones to open at the end down near the town hall end rather than the western end, and make that more of a residential.
It's a very live conversation. So thank you for that, Alex. That's great. I think it's a very live conversation. And like you say, you kind of recognise the challenge of practically doing that. We've had a whole range of bits of feedback so far, from kind of knock down Guildhall Street and build it just as houses, or you know, relocate everybody into the town centre. So this is absolutely something that's coming back to us. I mean, for us, we think now is quite a difficult time to say, oh, well, we'll just say that bit shouldn't be retail anymore, because there are so many other sorts of uses that we think there are opportunities for in Folkestone, and that actually the town centre could be a really great place for that. So the kind of bigger change towards either working from home or working close to home, the fact that people are relocating from bigger cities, and I don't want to just keep talking about London, but that would be one, people moving into Folkestone just for the fantastic quality of life that it offers by comparison with other kind of bigger cities, that there's an opportunity for introducing new things, not just shopping, to the high street that could perhaps take up some of that space. So whilst we think that we definitely need to push the town centre core to do more and to have a wider range of uses included within it, we're not at the moment saying, well, that means that all of those bits should become residential. We think that needs more a kind of longer term strategy and experimentation and kind of watching. But I think it's a really live conversation, and we would be really, really interested to hear people's views on that, and whether that meets with your kind of expectations. So I think it's really interesting to hear back from people on that. But our suggestion at the moment is that in terms of places to work, in terms of community facilities, that there are lots of other things that could be accommodated here that currently aren't being invited into the town centre, and that until we do that, we can't really take a view about how big or small it could be. There are also opportunities for delivering new housing in Folkestone. So, I mean, the seafront is the obvious one, but there are other opportunities. And so as more people perhaps come and live in the town centre, maybe we need more of that space. And once it's changed from retail to residential, it's never going back again. So our approach at the moment is to kind of keep a bit of a watching brief on that and try some other things out, particularly whilst at the moment the vacancy issues are concentrated in the town centre, and we're not going to say, well, that should all just be residential. We actually don't see that the vacancy is so much on the periphery, but the kind of where it is the biggest issue is centrally. So yeah, we're really interested to hear back from people on that. Hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're thinking of. Yeah,
it's a very interesting idea, and yeah, I can see that it needs a lot of thought, and it was obviously a long-term plan.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to come to Martha Tracy's question next about, could we create a young person shadow council or a board to make sure we're designing a town that meets their needs? I think this is a really interesting question, because this implies a structure that lasts beyond the life of just the place plan. So not just us having engagement with young people, which I've mentioned that we've been doing, but something that has a kind of longer term a legacy. And this is exactly the kind of action I think that we would like to highlight under that A Place for All Voices mission. I think it's mission 3. So I think it's a really, really useful suggestion, and we would be really pleased to talk to the council and to various stakeholders about how the voices of those young people are included, not just in this project, but in the development of the town going forward. I think that would be, I think that would be great. So I think that's a really helpful suggestion. And then we have a question from the anonymous attendee about the future of eyesores in the town, like the Grand Bursting, controversial, and other ugly buildings. We are looking at development opportunities, but Stina, I don't know how you would feel about saying something more about this, that we're not identifying by ugly. And we'd be really interested to hear, I think, through the feedback, which of the buildings you think would be highest on the list to be redeveloped. Stina, I don't know. I mean, it's possible that some of the sites that you're looking at, you'd consider that, don't want to offend anyone, that they might be a bit ugly. What do you think?
We haven't looked at them as whether they're ugly or it's not part of the criteria that we use to identify opportunity sites. I would also be really interested in hearing people's views on this. We have more looked at things that we think might be coming forward. So, for example, we know that something is happening with Folka. We know that the Saga building and the car park, there are plans there. It's likely that sites like the Lidl will be coming forward only by looking at it and the fact that there's a lot of surface car parking. And you look at it and you think that actually something else could be done with that. So, yes, we haven't really looked at ugly buildings. However, we have identified a number of sites where we think, for example, things could be done with the shop frontages and graphics and things that could signal change and contribute to making an attractive place. But that's normally not so much to do with ugly eyesores of buildings, but it's more to bring in new uses and expressions into the town centre.
I think that's very measured, Stina, but I would be really interested to hear from people through the surveys, which would be your top picks for eyesores to be addressed. So that would be really interesting. I'm just scrolling down through the questions a bit because I'm aware that we've had some kind of repeated, some people are clearly picking questions that lots of people want to hear answers on, but I am also keen to hear some other views. I wondered, Jemima, if you wanted to ask your question about accessibility for disabled people and changing places toilets, if you're comfortable to do that. I mean, we can see the question in the chat, but I wonder if that might be something you'd like to say to us directly.
Right. This is Janet, Jemima's mum. Jemima speaks with an electronic communication aid. If you can just give her a moment, she's prepared something to say about this. Is that okay?
Of course, yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Just give me 2 seconds. Right.
Hello, I'm Jemima. I go to Touch Base Care twice a week when there's not a pandemic, and in normal times I come to Folkestone for things like cinema, shopping, meeting friends for coffee or walks by the coast. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I'm quadriplegic, and the thing I need most in Folkestone is a changing place toilet. That's an accessible toilet with a hoist and adult-sized changing bench. I need that because I can't stand at all to transfer from my wheelchair to the toilet, and I need to lie down for carers to help me with my clothes. That's not possible in a standard wheelchair accessible toilet. The Changing Places National Organisation estimates that 250,000 people in the UK need changing place toilets. If there is not a toilet I can use, I can't go out for more than a couple of hours, depending on travel time. In Folkestone, Touch Base Care has one for its members when it's open, but the only public ones are in the Channel Tunnel Terminal, which is just for passengers, and the sports centre at Radnor Park. That's too far for someone who needs the toilet when they are out shopping. For Folkestone to be more accessible for people like me, whether they live here or want to visit, I think we need a changing place toilet in the town centre for people shopping or eating out, and another one near the harbour for people visiting the coast or creative quarter. It's difficult for wheelchair users to move between those two areas because of steep hills, so we need toilets in both. I really hope Folkestone will take the opportunity to become more accessible and welcoming to people with all kinds of disabilities.
And can I just add to that, as I've noted underneath the question, the comment was from me, in fact, Jemima's mum, that there is currently a £30 million government fund announced in the budget to which local authorities are going to be able to opt in or bid. I don't know exactly what the process and timescale is, but there is a major fund currently for improving provision of changing place toilets around the country.
I mean, I just want to say thank you so much for the contribution and for joining us tonight. And I think we absolutely should be including that in the place plan. It seems like, yeah, we must do that. And so thank you so much. And if there's money associated with it, then there's really there should be no barrier. So yes, thank you, both of you, for your contributions. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just wondering. as I look through, I mean, thanks so much for all the questions, and it's pretty clear that we're not going to get to them all. So as I said, we will try and make sure that we get all those answers up afterwards. So Lizzie has said, as regards to demographics, there are a lot of young people living in Folkestone. What plans have been put in place to engage with them apart from the skate park? Well, we've been engaging directly through schools groups. There's been several of those that have taken place so far. But I think this suggestion that came through, perhaps it was from Martha earlier, about having a structure in place that allows kind of longer term structures for young people's engagement with the future of Folkestone is a really good one, and one that we should be reflecting. So I think that seems really important. And I think some of those ideas around youth enterprise, the skate park you've mentioned in your question, that all of these things really are targeted at those age groups. And so we're making sure that feedback is kind of feeding into the development of the plan so far. There's a very specific question here from CB about street lighting being poor from Central Station to the town centre after dark. If we want to make these streets walkable and safe, we need to think about that. And I think that's absolutely true. And these kinds of observations, or your collective local knowledge about some of these issues, is completely invaluable. So it's just that we've definitely highlighted that route from the station to the town centre as being one that requires addressing. And then this just reminds us to make sure that we're thinking about lighting and safety as we're doing that. So just thank you for that. And that's, I guess, the purpose of this kind of session, is that we're not saying, here's a thing that we did, what do you think? But you're able to kind of highlight to us where there are particular challenges or opportunities. And Martha, again, all your questions are very popular, so you're at the top of my list a lot. The outdoor Lido, there has been this suggestion for a tidal pool. So maybe that answers this question. If there's, I think that would probably be the thing that addresses this increase in outdoor swimming and pulling people to the seafront and the town. So as an outdoor swimmer myself, I have to say I'm sympathetic to this cause. And also a question about the cycle strategy. So yes, we're really interested in hearing people's particular views about the cycle strategy. And Alex, thank you, has also mentioned that Cycle Shepway mentions or welcomes new members to feed into that. So it seems like there's maybe relationships between people here that are being facilitated. So that's great. Then John O'Connor's question is the next here. So what is the timescale envisaged for this forward planning to be consolidated into policy, and what is the period of years over which we might see development across the 6 key areas moving forward? He also says, am I also right to assume that there'll be ongoing consultation for these areas, projects and programs of work? So the place plan, our intention is that the place plan is finished. I've said June in that presentation. That's what we're aiming for. We've actually had some requests to kind of slightly expand the engagement that's taking place. So I think we might push into July, but that's the period over which we'll be developing the plan. And then the intention is not that it becomes adopted planning policy, but it's a regeneration strategy from the council. I don't know, Lorraine or Ewan, if you want to say more on this process. And then you're right to assume that ongoing consultation and community partnership and engagement for any of these areas. So, I mean, the answer to that is yes, is that through this process, we'll be identifying opportunities, but making sure that the requirement in a way for that to kind of continue through community engagement, we'll only be getting to a certain level of detail through this process. So there will be more work to be done and more conversations to be had and engagement to take place. So yes, really to that second question, you're right that nothing should be taken from the place plan and just delivered without further engagement and consultation. But I don't know if Ewan or Lorraine, you want to say anything further about kind of adoption of the place plan or kind of its status within the council.
Hi, thanks, Holly. Yeah, I completely agree with your response there. I think you're right. Earlier, you said that there may be aspects of the place plan that lead to policy in the future, and that's certainly something we're looking at. But first and foremost, we would see the plan being in a position where members would consider this and hopefully agree it as the regeneration, the direction for Folkestone, and that would then influence development as it comes forward.
Thanks very much. So hopefully, John, that answers your question. Richard Moffat. Hi, Richard. I know we've heard from you before and we've seen you at some of our workshops. A major potential area for community use. I mean, Richard, maybe you want to answer this question or ask the question directly. If we can ask you to do that.
Hi, Richard. Are you able to ask the question?
Yeah, okay. I'm unmuted now. I'm okay.
Yes, yeah.
No. What we are asking was that us at the Remembrance Line and our partners, Easter Creatives, we produced a scheme called Pebble and Sea, which is a community and tourism use for the old harbour railway between the current harbour boundary and the old level crossing at Folly Road. And we've been working on this for some years now. We have a degree of funding available, and we feel that this could be something that would benefit, so not only the community, it would be a community project, it'll be run by the community, be looked after the community. There's an opportunity for heritage, there's an opportunity for informing tourists of the heritage of the railway line and the harbour, and it'll also be in a position to hopefully provide the starter for a tram link with Central Station. And what our main question is actually is, what is the progress with the conveyancing of the railway line to the council from Network Rail, so that we can get our consultants and our sponsors and be able to access the funding we need to go forward with what we want to achieve with the old railway line.
So I don't know if you and or Lorraine, if you have the information to answer that, or if you'd like to come back and answer it separately later.
No, Holly, thank you. And thank you, Richard. Thank you for the question. At the moment, the council recognises the importance of the harbour line without doubt, and that's why it's been raised here as part of the place plan work. We're very keen to continue to work with groups like yourselves on that. At the moment, we're working with Network Rail to understand the implications of the council potentially acquiring the harbour line, working through that with at the moment. And we hope within the next 6 months that we will have a position on that from which we can move forward. I'm very happy to keep in touch with you offline as well.
Okay, yeah, many thanks for that for you, and fantastic, thank you.
Thanks both. I'm going to just keep scrolling through this list, and I can see that Jackie has asked what spaces for residents are we suggesting within the overall plan, not community services, but spaces internal and external that projects, charities and residents can use. So at the moment, we haven't been very specific about that, but we can see that there's potential for those kinds of uses. We would be really, really interested to hear from everybody at this point what particularly those uses could be, what spaces would be most useful. This is the kind of activity that we think, if there is vacant space in the town centre, which we anticipate that we know that there is, and that we anticipate that there will continue to be, that it's these kinds of uses that could potentially be considered. So it would be really great to hear from you, particularly about what those could be. But we're not at the point right now of specifying that thing's happening there and that thing's happening there. But space for these kinds of things, particularly where perhaps like that International House example that I mentioned, where there could be an interrelationship between more commercially viable uses, are things that we're really open to considering. So it would be great to hear from you. And Mary asked whether a park and ride scheme has been considered. I think the short answer to that is yes. It has been considered, and I think that there are opportunities for that, either as a test or also longer term. So I think that is a good suggestion, and it would be anything really that invites people not to bring their cars all the way into the town centre, I think would be beneficial. Then this anonymous attendee asks, which is always anonymous and ominous to have somebody we don't know who you are. What can ordinary residents do to contribute to the regeneration of the town centre, interacting with the council, participating in projects, setting up projects? Yes, please, do all of these things. To have so many people tonight and have so many people show their interest is fantastic, and we're just delighted with that. for you to tell us what you want to see in the place plan, so that when the place plan is kind of taken on board by the council and taken forward, they're confident that it's something that's genuinely supported by the people of Folkestone. I think that's really what we want to see. But beyond that, I think there are opportunities for participating more directly in projects and being involved in them in a more direct way. I don't know, Ewan, if you wanted to say anything more about that. It's a lovely comment.
Yes, I mean, thank you. And yeah, just, I mean, the engagement today has been so terrific. And so, you know, so getting the feedback from residents and members of the community, really central to building the plan. I think there'll always be an opportunity for community projects to come forward. It's not necessarily about the council providing funding, but we can always signpost and help groups access funding. I'm very happy to do that. And because for this plan, you know, our vision is there'll be some major investment opportunities, but also it is about local projects being taken forward as much as possible as well. So, you know, very happy for all ideas to come forward.
Thanks very much. I'm just wondering how, there's so many questions, so thank you, but we've only got now 9 minutes left. We're definitely getting to the point of, but there's covering also an awful lot of ground. So Chris Moyson, I don't know if you want to ask your question live, if you're happy to do that. This is about sustainability and net zero. If I can ask Emily to do the magic in the background.
Hi, yes. Hello, everyone. Yes, my point was about just seeing if we could perhaps sharpen the missions or have a bolder ambition when it comes to net zero and sustainability agenda. Because it just feels like not only is there an opportunity to create new green jobs and for that to be kind of an anchor for what we do, but also if we were to champion that sort of agenda within Folkestone, it could unlock new public and private finance to supplement what the council is putting into this.
Thanks very much for that. And I think, I mean, for me, that it's really helpful to be challenged on those missions. So that kind of higher level tier of what we're talking about, not just literally kind of what are the projects or what might we spend money on, but are we even aiming for the right things? And you'll see that kind of mission 4 was about moving sustainably, and that was kind of quite specifically about transport and connections. We've had some previous feedback that perhaps that should be reworded to being moving forward sustainably, which I think is broader and implies kind of bigger or wider ambitions. But I also actually wonder if this shouldn't be, it's getting a bit techie kind of involved with the place plan, but if it shouldn't be mission 6, which is delivering quality, but making sure that that is, when we're talking about quality, what we mean is these higher environmental standards, so that everything that is delivered is not just good quality, but also having strong ambitions for sustainability. So I think to be challenged on the strength of this agenda within the place plan is really well received. I think we should go away and think really carefully about how we best respond to that. So thank you for your input. And then so Gillian, you're next on the list at the moment. So you've had international and out-of-town visitors to your home over the last 10 years. The first thing they say when they're arriving by train is what a dirty town you live in. I think that reflects, sadly, some of the feedback that we've had so far. So are we looking into cleanliness of the streets around the town centre? A clean town is a safe town, as proved by a DEFRA report. It's not something so far that we have specifically looked into, but it is something that does come up a lot, and I think it needs to be considered alongside the kind of more specific, almost more transformational changes that we're talking about. And I think it's a good challenge to us to remember that some of these sort of everyday activities and almost more operational activities are still incredibly important. So I think that's a good point to raise. Looking at the roads, will we bear in mind that even around the town centre, the speed of traffic is extremely dangerous? So the short answer to that is yes, and that the proposals that ourselves and Steer will be looking at how we can address that without introducing congestion. That's not what we're aiming for, but to make sure that the environments of those roads are more conducive to safe walking and safe cycling, and less conducive to speeding around like you're on a racetrack. So this is the level of detail really that we're kind of on the precipice of getting into in a higher level of fidelity. And it's helpful for us to know if there are particular points within the town centre that are challenging or that you feel are unsafe. Certainly that route from the station towards the town centre, I think, and the kind of various crossing points along that way can be quite difficult, especially if you feel like I might just chance it and get across here without waiting for the lights. So I think both of those points are well made and consistent with what we've heard so far. And then Lee Norgrove, I'm going to just go for, I think, two more questions. Lee, maybe do you want to ask your question about play, children's play? If I can ask Emily to do the magic again.
Hi Lee, you should be now able to ask your question if you're happy to. I'm just having a problem with getting Lee to unmute. Perhaps Holly, are you able to ask that question instead?
Yeah, I can do it. So it says, will children be able to play in the central area? And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we hope with the space that we can see could be freed up from the bus station around Bouverie Square, or reinstating Bouverie Square. That's exactly the kind of activity that currently is quite tricky, although we could see opportunities for kind of smaller opportunities for play within the public realm of the town centre. That is exactly the kind of thing that we think could be incorporated. And then Lee's also asking where the bus station would be relocated. So we're looking at different options for this, but at the moment, one of those is it could be a kind of on-street arrangement along Shelland Street. There are other possible configurations, and it obviously needs careful consideration and discussion, of course, with the bus companies. But that's one option. Having said two questions, I'm afraid I wasted a little bit of time trying to make sure that we hear your voices. And I think with just 3 minutes left, I'm going to have to say that I'm afraid that all the 144 questions that are unanswered, sorry guys, that we're going to have to come back to those separately, but there just isn't enough time to feed back on all of this. But from our side, or from my side certainly, that has been really kind of enriching and helpful and useful, and we really, really hope to kind of feed in all of this feedback to the onwards development of the place plan as we move forward. And I want to say thank you so much for giving us your evening. And I'm going to hand back to Councillor Monk to just say goodbye to everybody, if that's okay, Councillor Monk.
Okay, thank you very much, Holly. Now, I didn't say anything at the front end, but We Made That, who are carrying out this work, have a very good reputation. If you don't know them, I suggest you look them up. They've done lots of regeneration projects around the country, in London, and they're very, very well respected. And I now wish to thank all of you who have taken part. Over 152 questions so far. We have committed to give a generic answer to all of them, and that we will do. This really is an exciting project that gets us an idea of where we think that Folkestone should go in the future, and lots of things then have to come into play to actually get us to be able to instigate it. But we start with a plan and with the input from all of you. And so I thank you very much for joining us this evening. Goodbye.